Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. This is a very exciting welcome back to our FutureTalks events. We're very happy at New Relic to bring these virtual FutureTalks back for our community. My name is Arian Evans, and I use she, her, AF pronouns. I'm part of our New Relic social impact team, newrelic.org. Through our community programs, we are committed to driving more equitable access to technology. We're so proud to bring back these talks and be able to offer virtual events like FutureTalks to provide our community with opportunities to hear about topics that are impacting the tech community. I want to share a reminder. Typically at FutureTalks, we are joined by members of our recruiting team. Since it's virtual today, please visit our career page and check out a list of our open positions. We are always actively recruiting. As a reminder, this is a public event with relics and non-relics present. Please submit your questions for the panel through the chat feature, and we will capture them for the Q&A portion at the end. I'm so excited to welcome Marca Clark. And as our moderator, she will take it away from here. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Arian. I'm really happy to be here today for this conversation. So at New Relic, we're planning for a flexible future. And what that means is that all of our employees will be able to choose where and how they work, so long as operational and business needs are met. Now, the pandemic forced this great experiment on us of working remotely. And there have been many positives, productivity, increased accountability, which is because people are feeling the trust. They're feeling like they're being treated as adults who are fully capable of performing under these unusual circumstances. And so many people have risen to the challenge. There have also been some hard things. So people are dealing with disconnection, isolation, burnout, exhaustion. So as we look ahead to the flexible future, we need to figure out how to hang on to those positives and also address some of the challenges that we're facing. And we can't assume that a hybrid model miraculously solves everything when it comes to accessibility. There's still accessibility challenges for people with disabilities who are underrepresented in the workforce. So I've really been looking forward to this panel discussion and learning from our panelists, Miki, Mark, and Katie. We're going to start with introductions and hear about kind of how the pandemic has been impacting the way that our panelists work, including some of the challenges and accommodations. Then we'll take the future focus and we'll talk about kind of systemic changes that need to happen, as well as how advocacy and allyship plays a role. And we'll end with a call to action. So with that, I would love to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Mark. If you want to go ahead and join me on camera.
Hi, thank you so much, Marca. My name is Mark Espina. I'm a junior database engineer at Pollinate, a marketing agency here in Portland, Oregon. And I have cerebral palsy, which has differing, it's a neurological condition with varying levels of severity. And in my case, that means I have limited mobility control over my right side of my body, my right hand, for example. And my pronouns are he, him. And I'm very excited about today's conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Katie, would you like to join us?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Cambridge. I use she, her pronouns. I currently work at Zapproved as the Senior Manager of Legal Operations and their corporate attorney. I was born with ocular albinism, which is an eye condition that is characterized by nystagmus, so involuntary rapid eye movement, as well as the rerouting of the optic nerves and reduced retinal pigment. And what that all means is I have about 2,200 visual acuity in one eye, so hitting the standard of legally blind. And then in the other eye, I have what is called low vision. I just wanted to share a couple stats with you real quick. 1 in 4 Americans have a disability, and 70% of people with disabilities have what are called hidden disabilities, or disabilities that are not easily noticeable to others. Yet people with disabilities are twice as likely to be unemployed. So there's a lot of untapped talent out there. And what I want to do today is create some awareness around some of those barriers that impact people with disabilities for entering the workforce, as well as for retention and promotion within the workforce once they get there. So I'm really excited to be here today and just deeply honored. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Miki.
Thanks. I'm Miki Demeter. I'm a security researcher at Intel. I've been there about 14 years. I've been, doing talks and things like this for so long that I really am excited about this. It's not often that we get to come and talk about our personal disabilities. Mine happens to be ADHD, and also I have a eating disorder, and that eating disorder and my ADHD are 2 of those disabilities. They're not always visible.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introductions. So we're going to move now into talking about kind of your current work situation. And I'm going to start with Katie and curious about how you're working now. How has, I'm assuming that you're working remote, how has the way that you're working hindered or enhanced accessibility? And then an add-on to that is when companies return to work in person, what sort of practices and lessons do you hope that they'll pull forward?
Yeah, definitely. So I am working remotely, and I am very much enjoying working remotely. For me, it's just completely changed my life. It's enhanced accessibility because I no longer have to worry about getting to the office every day. So for people who have visual impairments, transportation, commuting, those are all massive challenges in our daily life. And for me, working remotely has taken that burden away. Also, I no longer have to be in an open office environment, which is also challenging for me. I have to pull my monitors very close to my face to read in the office. And you'd be surprised how many people stop by my desk and say, "Hey, Katie, I think you need glasses," or "Hey, Katie, have you had your eyes checked lately?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I was born with this." And I have to go into this whole explanation about my disability just to kind of explain to them, like, this is something that I deal with on a daily basis. And, the other thing that would happen is if I have my monitors set up a certain way, the cleaning crew would come in at night and readjust those monitors overnight. And then I'd have to set that back up in the morning every day. So working from home has really changed my life because I have my workstation set up properly. It's really, my space. I can just focus on what I need to do and accomplish every single day, which is getting my work done. So for me, and I realize that it's not the same for everybody, but for me, it's definitely enhanced accessibility. And what I'd like to see companies carry forward is that flexibility in working remotely. And I think what the pandemic has shown us is that, when companies they had to pivot quickly. And we had to do away with some of those outdated old school notions of being in the office from 9 to 5 and, just really, staying late until your boss leaves. So all those things had to be done away with. And I want to see companies continue to provide options because I do think that options provide opportunities for many people. One of the things that Zapproved has done is that they have given people the option. They can work remotely if they want. They can be on a hybrid model if they want, and they can come into the office if they want. And I'd really like to see companies take that approach in the future because I do believe that if you provide options, you're going to create opportunities for a number of underrepresented groups in our community. And also, if you provide options, you'll create an inclusive work environment just because you are going to get more diverse applicants that way. So I'd like to see both of those things continued, providing options and flexibility.
Great, thank you. So Mark, similar question for you about how you're currently working and if this way of working has hindered or enhanced accessibility for you? And then I have an add-on question, but I'll let you get started.
Yeah, I am also working remotely, and it's been a very great experience for me. Katie, you mentioned challenges that you've faced sort of breaking into the tech sector, and certainly when I was looking to get into tech, one of the things I was looking for was the possibility of remote work. This was prior to the pandemic, and that was a bit of a obstacle for me because I would always ask about that possibility as a benefit when looking for a job, and not every employer was open to providing that. And so the pandemic has really shifted the conversation and made that more accessible to me personally, which I really love. Also, as far as technology and working remotely, meetings like this on Zoom are great, especially if your company has a policy where you don't always have to have your camera on. And even going one step further, taking advantage of platforms' recording capabilities. So let's say you're onboarding and you have to learn a specific platform and the different details. One thing that I really appreciated was employers will, if you're lucky, they'll offer to actually record a training beforehand so that you can sort of ramp up at your leisure and you can pause. So you're not worried about like losing information and like worried about taking notes or anything like that, which would certainly be something that I struggled with if I didn't have that option. And just outside of that, I do think the pandemic has opened up the conversation about how there are a lot of assistive technologies out there, like, for example, screen readers for people that need them that can't interpret visual images from the computer easily, or things like that. So, and a lot of people can talk about it. And, Twitter has, I think, built-in options for image descriptions when you share images on social media. So things like that are definitely advancing accessible features in certain ways. But one thing I would like to see more of is really the fact that disability is not a monolith, and really on the individual level, everybody has very different needs. So when you're working, when you're in the workplace, I'd like to see more understanding from employers that accommodations aren't just like some blanket policy that you can implement for every person with a disability and say like, oh, what do you mean? We bought that auto captioning software, and all of our transcriptions have that. That's fine. Like, we don't have to do anything else. And I'd really like to see them acknowledge that there's a lot more work to do, and they really need to listen to their employees who actually live with these challenges day to day.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. All right, Miki, over to you with a similar question with a slightly different twist, which is, of course, tell us about your experience with working remotely, what's hindered, what's helped, and then also adding on, what else do you wish technology, since we're here, with WIT and with New Relic, what else do you wish technology would do to increase accessibility for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm on the opposite end of the scale when it comes to working remotely. And that is, both of my disabilities really took off bad as soon as we went remote. And so working remote is very difficult for me. To give you some kind of an idea, my day would start, I would be in a meeting, a dog would bark. Okay, the dog barked, pet the dog. Oh, look, no, there's a mat on the dog. Let me go get the mat brush. Where's the mat brush? I can't find it. Oh, look, I found something different. And so that's kind of the way that my mind works. And it's very hard to maintain focus and maintain, everything there. And then my eating disorder, because I'm an extrovert, very much an extrovert, and I need people around. And my eating disorder took off because I didn't have the social interaction with people who were, help me, unknowingly that I had an eating disorder. And by going out to lunch with them and, just being social and being able to talk and then being locked up here at home, I just quit eating basically for quite a while, and it wasn't good. And then what I would really like to see employers do is understand that, just like Katie said and Mark, that not all disabilities are the same, and that they need to understand that what may be good for one person with a disability is not going to necessarily be good for everyone. And so, because this is not a one size fits all, and they need to listen to the employee and make accommodations accordingly, and not just say, well, this is our company policy.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I think one thing that I'm learning and really developing empathy for is just the range of experiences that you all are sharing, and also the differences in what would work for you versus what wouldn't work. Miki, I'd love to stay on you, and you mentioned accommodations. I'm curious about for people who are thinking about workplace disclosure, and for yourself, like what factors into your decision about whether you're going to disclose your disability to coworkers or to a manager, and then try to work towards an accommodation?
For my ADHD, I did actually request, and my boss is very good. And I told him, I said, this is what I have. This is what happens to me. I need to be able to work on more than one project at a time. And so that way, if I do get distracted, I can be working on something else instead of, what I'm doing. And so I basically run 2 or 3 different projects now at a time. And it worked out very well, because if I had only had one project like most of my team members do to work on, I probably wouldn't have gotten it done in the amount of time that was necessary. Then my eating disorder, I opted not to disclose it. And nobody there knew that I did until late last year, about September timeframe, when I had to go into treatment, and spent treatment and residential treatment from then clear until May of this year. And so it's really hard.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk now specifically about the challenges that you've faced. And Katie, this first question is for you in this section. And you brought up a really good point when we were prepping about like this isn't just about challenges that are faced once you are employed. There are also challenges in the pre-employment phase of work. So I would love for you to share a time that you've faced a challenge in the employment process related to your disability.
Yeah, definitely. For me, the challenges really start at the beginning of the process, even at the interview process. So I'm going to just share an example of what this looks like for me. I interviewed a few years back for a company that was headquartered in California, but had an office in Portland. And I went through the recruiter interview, and then I went to the Portland office, and I had 6 interviews. And then I was selected with one other candidate to fly to California to do the final round of interviews. Transportation is very challenging for me. Flying is very challenging for me because I have to try and figure out how to get around an airport, and sometimes an airport that I'm unfamiliar with. I can't see gate signs very easily. I can't even see menus in restaurants that are behind the registrar and up high. So I'll have to pull out my phone and use my camera and try to zoom in to see a menu if they don't have a barcode that I can scan. So all things about flying can be like very anxiety producing, including even finding baggage claim or finding an Uber pickup. So when I landed in California, I went to my hotel and I was picked up the next morning by an Uber, and I was dropped off downtown, and I was dropped off in their own place. And they had renumbered all the addresses. So Google Maps wasn't picking up the address correctly. So I was about 2 blocks off, and the addresses on the buildings were really high up and I couldn't see them. And they were in a terrible color font that I made it even more challenging for me to get around. And I had to ask people where to go. And a very nice gentleman actually escorted me to the building after asking him if he knew where this building was. And he did, thankfully, and I wasn't late for my interviews. But that was also another challenge that I encountered, and also very anxiety producing along the way. When I got there, the recruiter showed me around and introduced me to a bunch of people who were wearing name tags. Well, I can't see name tags. So I was sitting there trying to memorize people's names so that I could send follow-up thank you notes later on. Memorize, okay, someone has red hair and glasses, and just trying to do anything to gather that information. And then went through 9 interviews back to back. And at the end of that, I was shuffled into a room to give a presentation, which I didn't know about, with all the people that I interviewed with and about 10 more people. And I prepared for the presentation, and I had asked for an accommodation to sit down and read my slides from my laptop versus standing, because I can't see my PowerPoint slides if I'm standing. The person who was also interviewing the other candidate, they were able to stand during the interview. A couple of days later, I found out I didn't get the job, and I asked why. And the recruiter told me that the other person's interview presentation was stronger than mine. And when they said that, I had asked myself, and of course it popped into my head, like, was it stronger because they could stand and I couldn't? And that will always be in my mind. And what was really odd about that situation is that I was then offered a lower level, lower paying, less visible job with the company, which I declined. But that's an example of highlighting a number of challenges for someone with a disability, from traveling to getting to an office to trying to see something that you can't see, being put into a position where you can quickly be labeled as weaker. And I think there are a number of challenges, unfortunately, in our system today for hiring, including things like giving exams prior to meeting a hiring manager. Many companies do this now, where they offer exams. But if I have to ask for accommodations before even meeting a hiring manager, and I'm working with a talent recruiter who may not know how to accommodate properly, or doesn't know how to work with HR on this, or work with the company who's offering the exam, that can be very challenging. And I may not get fully accommodated. So I think the system today is actually weeding out a lot of potential applicants in the process. And it's really unfortunate. And, I talked about the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. And if you have a system set up that's designed for an ableist society, you're going to weed those people out unintentionally, maybe, but that's kind of what happens. And so those are just a few examples of the pre-employment. And then there's, once you get to employment, just asking for accommodations along the way. But I'll let someone else touch on that.
Yeah, thank you. So Mark, similar question for you, but now kind of relating to once you've got the job, what are some of the challenges that you've faced at work relating to your disability? And curious how it's impacted you, but also like, how has it impacted the team? What are people missing out because you're not, because you're facing these challenges?
Well, it's actually interesting that you asked that, because I have a very visible disability, and because I'm working remotely, and even right now, if I'm not like holding up my hand in front of you, you wouldn't necessarily know that I have a disability. So in that respect, like I never necessarily needed to disclose, and only a few people prior to me actually going to the office in person, which is when I actually ended up facing a physical challenge, which I'll get into. But it was interesting because prior to the pandemic, everybody would find out essentially when I went in for an in-person interview, there wouldn't even be a step where I'd formally disclose. I would kind of show up and I would kind of use that as a litmus test to gauge whether or not like my would-be future coworkers or managers were comfortable with me or had any reservations in terms of, you know, my ability to do the job, which is something I have faced before. Now, since the pandemic and getting hired remotely, my company did institute a policy of if you're local to the Portland area and you'd like to come in, you're welcome to. And I had thought I was curious, so I did start going in. And actually, this is something that I didn't actually figure out was kind of an issue until I had gone in a few times when I really noticed what was happening. But when you show up to an office, there are just certain things that you do that you kind of take for granted that we don't think about because we're working remotely. But just in terms of like setting up your workstation, one thing that you have to do is plug in your equipment and make sure it all works. And in the office, the way the desks are set up, the power strip that you would plug into is sort of on the floor, way in the back of like a group of desks. And with my condition, I literally, it wasn't as simple as just crouching down on the floor and plugging in. I had to basically crawl or lie down under a desk to get to the power strip and plug it in. And the floor itself, it's not soft. So I'm literally, to start my day, I'm literally lying down on the floor and plugging something in. And then to end the day when I leave, also taking my computer back because, you know, I'm not working every day. So literally to start the workday and end the workday, I have to subject my body to like lying down on this hard floor and like just having a really uncomfortable feeling in my body, both starting my workday and ending it on top of the commute, which when it first happened, I didn't actually really think much of it because I sort of had a gut reaction of like, oh yeah, this is how offices are set up, and yeah. I'm not surprised. But when I had gone into the office starting like 2 days a week, which I decided to forego because I didn't think it was worth it after a while. But I realized like, this is actually kind of taking a toll on my body, and I don't really need this. Now, if I was going to want to be in the office more, then I would have brought it up to HR of like, hey, this is an issue I'm dealing with. Could we either maybe find a different workstation with a better setup for me or not? But because I chose to just work from home most of the time and haven't really gone into the office since, I chose not to escalate this.
Yeah. So that sounds like the workstation setup is definitely having an impact on where you choose to work and maybe how you feel about your relationship with the workplace, with the office. Miki, I'm going to turn it over to you. And you already started to talk about kind of the impact of your disabilities and what you chose to disclose and what you chose not to disclose. But I would love to have you expand a little bit more on kind of what makes work challenging for you in relation to your disability, and any sort of impact of disclosing and not disclosing, right? Because you disclosed one, but not the other. Has that had any sort of ongoing impact on you or the people you work with?
Well, I mean, when you take my eating disorder into account, you look right there, and yes, it did affect my, my job position. I missed out on a promotion because of it, and it's not something that I'm going to get back anytime soon. But because I was out for the better part of a year, I understand it. But I mean, I still feel that I was kind of cheated out of my promotion. And it's just something I think a lot of us deal with, that the able-bodied person gets it before you get it. And whereas my ADHD, by working with my boss and asking for accommodation and getting that, that's what gave them the view that I was ready for a grade level promotion. By the fact that I could do work, I was doing lots of work, and the reason I was doing lots of work is because I had different projects to work on.
Yeah.
And so that's where it ended up for me. And so technology is kind of hit and miss with me, because while the technology is there, and if you choose not to disclose, nobody checks.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story, I think, of enlisting others, and how that can turn into a real positive. And that's kind of a nice way to transition into the next section, which is about internal advocates, external advocates, and also some of the systemic changes that are needed. So Miki, we'll stick with you, and would love to hear about any internal champions, advocates, or allies that you've had at work that have helped to elevate the needs of people with disabilities.
Absolutely. My boss is one of them. I mean, he's one that, he looks out for everybody's well-being. Once he realized I had an eating disorder, he would actually, ping me a couple times a day saying, "Have you eaten today?" And, just trying to make sure that, I was being taken care of. But one of the things that I really like is that Intel, they actually have an ERG for accessibility and disability. And it's called IDAN. It's the Intel Disability Accessibility Network. And so as a first step, when people tell me that they have a disability, but they don't want to say anything about it, I always point them to the ERG, because there you can go talk, and you're talking with other people who are possibly in the same position as you are. So that if you don't want to go to HR, you can at least go to and talk to people and find allies, find people who will, stand up and advocate for you.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful resource. That's great. So I'm going to turn it over now to Katie, and then would love for Mark to add on. What else is needed in terms of change besides allyship and advocacy?
Yeah, I think company culture in some places would need to change. It can be very challenging for a person with a disability to navigate company culture. If you look at the top of your company and the only people you see are able people, and there's not a single person with a disability in leadership or management, you're as a company, you're sending a signal to everybody else. Every person in the office who has a disability is seeing that as a sign that your company doesn't promote people with disabilities. And I think there's still a lot of subconscious bias that exists in terms of promotion. I think there's bias in the way that we think somebody should work at that level in terms of fast pace, and that there may be bias in the sense that someone might think you're too slow or not strong enough or not equipped to handle the challenges that come with leadership. And I think those are barriers that we need to work on breaking down in our culture and in companies, many companies still. Secondly, I would think that we need to redefine some of the manager expectations. I know that I've been in situations where I'm meeting 20 expectations, but there's one that I can't meet. Maybe there's 21, and that last one is giving presentations in front of large groups. And if I'm standing in front of large groups and I'm trying to give presentations, the slides are behind me, that's a very challenging expectation for me to meet. And maybe there needs to be some redefining of those expectations, because I think people with disabilities offer a lot more and are often doing a lot more. They're outside of their current roles. And I think that managers need to be flexible in that department. And lastly, I think there just needs to be overall improvement in DE&I initiatives. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've sat through trainings or programs where disability just gets rattled off in like a long line of protected classes, but no one really stops to talk about what that means. Nobody talks about the disability pay gap. Nobody, you hear about the gender pay gap, but you don't hear about the disability pay gap. And many people probably don't know, but there's actually a federal law that says you can pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. Like that still exists. So to me, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in just creating awareness around some of those issues that still exist in our society today, and a lot of work around the legal system and the laws that are in place, because I can tell you that there's not a lot of protections in place for people with disabilities. So yeah, I would say those are the three main areas that I think need to be adjusted in order for progress to be made.
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything Katie just touched on. And just add on, really fundamentally, I think in terms of a cultural shift, or a company having a culture that is welcoming and inclusive of employees with disabilities, that is a very tough thing. But in my experience, for example, in my current company, some of the concrete things that I can pull out as to reasons why I'm comfortable disclosing, or why I feel like my company has a culture where I am welcome, are things like when I was onboarded remotely multiple times during the week, both my manager, HR, and in a meeting with the company founders, they all repeatedly asked me like, hey, did you make sure to check in and let us know if you need any requests for anything to get you set up and working the best that you can? And in that context, it's very broad and is probably more aimed at like, do you have everything from a work from home setup that you need to succeed? And part of me thinks that came out of my company specifically having a lot of working parents and dealing with not really having childcare and parenting at home, but seeing that this company like really invested in not just like having a policy of everybody can work from home, but really trying to support their employees' work-life balance with remote work and some of the challenges that come with that, was a very clear signal to me that they would be at least open to my disclosing and exploring options for any accommodations that I might need as a result of that.
Yeah, I know there are recruiters on this call, so I hope your ears are perking up when you think about how to hire great quality candidates in this market where it's the job seekers market. We've just got some good tips. We're going to stay along this vein for the remaining part of the panel, and then we'll move to Q&A and really focusing next on kind of a call to action. So we're going to hear from each of the panelists some tangible things that companies can do. So we've got HR folks, we've got inclusion, we've got technologists who are building things for people. So please take note of some of the things that you can do. And then we'll end with the panelists giving advice to attendees who perhaps are struggling with their own disabilities at work. So here's some parting advice. So Mark, we're gonna stay with you and have you start. If there's anything else you want to add on really tangible tactics that companies can take to improve accessibility in the workplace.
For me, just the biggest thing that really did make a difference in my case was it's kind of night and day with companies allowing recordings of specific technology trainings. Like it might be proprietary or something like that, but platforms literally have options for, securely sharing recorded content. And if you're actually willing to invest in that, you should be able to just take the time to research the feature offerings of whatever platform you're using to take advantage of that, so your employees, can really review information at their leisure and not really have to worry about keeping pace with what's happening on the screen. That has kind of been a night and day experience, just in terms of what I've seen.
Yeah, thank you. Miki and then Katie on the same question.
Well, I think some of the things that really need to be done is, like Katie said, that 70% of people with disabilities it doesn't show, you don't see it. And you need a culture built in your company that isn't dependent upon the person with the disability disclosing everything. That culture needs to be pushed down from the top, that we are inclusive, we will do what's necessary, and that's it.
Thanks.
Yeah, again, I'm going to go back to that flexibility and where we are now today. I think a lot of companies just need to remain flexible, give options, don't force people to be on Zoom if they don't want to be on, Zoom video. That might be really uncomfortable for people for a variety of reasons. And I think just giving those options every, step of the way and where possible is really what a company should be geared to. One of the other things I'd call out too is, make sure your accommodation request form is easily accessible to people. I can't tell you how many places I've worked for where I can't even find the request form, but make sure it's visible on your, internal internet, and ensure that it's easy to use and fill out. You don't need to ask a bunch of complicated questions or have someone deep dive into their disability, and it shouldn't be that challenging for someone to request an accommodation. So I just ensure that that's visible and folks know about it. And I would, I'd also try to get your name out there as a company who supports people with disabilities. I know my company is really amazing at this. They're very inclusive, and they really do a lot of work with the community to ensure that everyone feels included in the work environment. And I think it really shows when you work for a company like that, and people know. And I want to say, I wish I could say that good news spreads faster than bad news, but that's not really true. And if you're a company that doesn't support people with disabilities, that's going to spread really, really quickly through the disability community. So I would just ensure to kind of get the word out there that you do support people with disabilities working for you, and that you do want to be an advocate for people, because again, it's 1 in 4 Americans. So it's a lot of untapped talent.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll take the final advice from y'all before we turn it over to Arian for Q&A. So Miki, what advice do you have for attendees who are struggling with their own disability, whether it's disclosing, asking for support, or just finding a way to bring their whole selves to work?
The first thing to do is to understand that you're not alone, right? And that's the big thing, is that you're not alone in this. If you're afraid of, disclosing it or whatnot, start the conversation with someone that you trust. Perhaps your boss, perhaps, an upper level management, perhaps another ally. Or in the case of Intel, you can always reach out to the employee resource group. And so by doing those things, you need to advocate for yourself, but you shouldn't have to force it. So that's the big thing that I see, is if you've got a disability and you need, accommodation for it, don't be afraid to ask for it.
Thank you. Katie, and then we'll end with Mark.
Yeah, I really have to echo what Miki said there, because it's just spot on. Finding people who are your advocates, and really just, working closely with if you can't find someone, working closely with someone in DE&I is a really good place to start, and just kind of bouncing ideas off them or conversations off them. I've done this in the past where I felt really uncomfortable disclosing something and asking for an accommodation. And, I actually called one of our DE&I specialists and spoke with her for a long period of time about how to manage the disclosure. And for me, that was really helpful because I knew that she was an ally. I knew that she supported me. So just finding that network of people. And there's a lot of people out there who are going through this. And I think we're just getting to a point as a society where we're able to talk about these things a little bit more openly. And as we continue talking and having these conversations, are going to find more and more allies. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, I would echo everything that's been said. In my case specifically, I was very lucky to get matched with a professional mentor through a mentoring program that I was in a couple of years ago. And it just so happened that they also had a disability. And one of the things we worked on, and the best advice that I ever got, was if you're going to ask for an accommodation at work, be very, very clear about, the context. This is the problem I'm having, and this is how it interferes with my work. And this is what I need to do as much research as you can, have a possible solution suggested up front. Really, bottom line, make it very hard for them to say no. At the end of the day, you know what you're capable of and the challenges that you face. So you're the best person to know what you need, and you should be comfortable asking for what you need.
All right. Thank you so much, panel. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Arian to see if there are any questions.
Echoing the sentiment that's happening in the chat, super thankful to have each of you share your personal accounts. The first question is curious about how skimming content with screen readers is achieved. And that's a question you're comfortable answer. Feel free to. If not, we can go to the next one.
I've used screen readers before, and I've always had trouble with screen readers, to be honest. Sometimes it's technical issues. And for me, it's oftentimes because it's so magnified that it's like honed in on one area, and then I can't get like the full picture of something. So that's been really challenging for me. And I will say the other thing, I have a magnifier on my phone, and it doesn't work with some apps, and I don't know why. It works with some apps, but it doesn't work with other apps. So that's another area that could be improved. Like I have trouble magnifying things in my Slack messages, oddly, out of all places. So, and I don't know why that is, but I think there's definitely work that can be done in the technical side to make things a little bit more usable for people.
Yeah, I guess good feedback for some UX designers who are thinking about how to make things more accessible. Question for Mark. Could having a separate cord in one workplace and another cord in another workplace, could that be helpful for your office setup instead of unplugging and replugging every time?
In this particular context, that might be a solution. One thing I would caution about like cases like that with physical disabilities, especially, some conditions are degenerative. So what I'm capable of today might not be what I'm capable of in 5 years, in 1 year, in 10. So even if we do have a solution, employers need to understand that situations can evolve, and there's a lot of moving parts to them, and they need to be flexible with those solutions as well.
Yeah, thank you. Another question is, how have the other intersections of your life, gender or gender identity, race, or sexual orientation impacted your ability to work with one or more disabilities? Has this affected your decision to disclose or ask for accommodations?
I could answer a little bit of that in that as a trans woman, gender dysphoria is probably one of the major causes of my eating disorder. By living with it, it gave me, well, based on the way that society looks at us and the way that we always try to be much more, acceptable to the public, it's difficult, and it was really hard. So many of the intersections of all of these different groups, I mean, plays heavily in on top of being, having a disability.
Yeah, I'd have to echo that. When you're part of a number of protected classes, I mean, it really just gets more challenging. And I've experienced this a lot just in the legal profession and just being a woman and a mother and a person with a disability. And when you add that all together, it really does make certain aspects of my work life challenging, including advancement and promotion. And, all I can hope is that we just keep talking about it and keep creating awareness around these issues. And I think as long as we keep going that direction, I hope that things get better for all of us.
Lots of gratitude in the chat. Another question is, this person agrees with Katie's sentiment about it being hard when there's a lack of representation and leadership. But part of that is that some disabilities are invisible. How do we know if any of our leaders have an invisible disability without calling it out as other in front of a company? What ways would you appreciate your leadership representation?
Yeah, I think that if you have, DE&I initiatives, that if you do have a leader or someone on the ELT team who has a disability, then I think that they should really be involved in working with your DE&I group and specifically, working on trainings and awareness around disability. That's what I would hope would be happening from a leader in that position. Of course, you don't want to call somebody out or, search for a disability, but I do think that if you're a leader in that position, that's really one way that you would find someone like that, so that most likely they'd be involved with a lot of the DE&I initiatives that are happening at your company if you have a good work culture.
I want to piggyback on that yes, culture is it. Because if you've got a culture of safety where people can come out and say, I have a disability, there's no reason for our leadership, anybody on the leadership team, not to be open about it.
Another question is, what advice, dog in the background also has a question. What advice for allies seeking to be better allies in the workplace or non-place, and as the case may be, would you recommend?
I would place emphasis on the reality that just because you happen to maybe know someone or maybe a group of people with disabilities, it doesn't mean suddenly that you can empathize with everybody who has any disability at all. It's extremely individual, and our experiences are very, very specific to ourselves. So you should understand that. One kind of smaller thing, if you've ever come across posts, I see these on LinkedIn shared usually by C-suite level people of using a disabled person as sort of your mascot for no excuses because, you know, Jimmy lost his leg in an accident, but, you know, he just ran a marathon with his prosthetic. We call that inspiration porn. I'm not here to be anybody's inspiration porn. And that is a very big red flag. Like, I would never want to work for a company of an employee that I see is sharing that kind of content on LinkedIn.
I would say you want to be that person that leads with intent. So, I mean, if you see bad behavior, call it out and make sure that other people understand that, hey, that isn't the way that we can do things here. And, you know, just by being that person who is willing to call out bad behavior.
Yeah, and I would say that you can be an ally, but, you know, again, change has to come from the top, and we very much appreciate allies and support, and we want that system built. But again, those allies really need to be at the top of the company to make change throughout the company. So I would encourage managers, directors, leaders to really start looking at how you could improve things for people with disabilities at your company.
And there are a couple more questions in there, but we are just at time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. And so I truly appreciate each of you, Mark, Katie, Miki, and Marca as well, for leading us in this conversation. And I've learned so much listening in and over the last hour, and look forward to continuing to learn more from each of you as I watch your professions grow and change, and hope to stay connected. For everyone else, thank you again for joining Future Talks. Next month, we will be exploring a conversation on the future of accessibility for veterans. November is host to Veterans Day, and there are quite a bit of things that we don't always acknowledge or realize or understand about veterans and tech. And so I look forward to listening in on that conversation as well. And again, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, if it is